In 1972, Honda launched the first generation Civic. 50 years later, we're here with the latest 11th generation model. And in this video, we're running through everything that you need to know about it. But before we get into that, if you want a great deal on your next car, then click on the link or look in our description below to go to whatcar.com and subscribe to our channel so you can see our full review of the car as soon as we've driven it. So clearly, the most obvious difference between the new Civic and the old one is the overall design. So with the previous car, it had quite a sporty look, there was a lot going on with it, but Honda now has spoken about cleaning that up a bit and giving it a sleeker, more conventional look. So to that end, it's got this differently styled front end and it's got these thin headlights as well. And for the first time on a Civic, you can get matrix LED headlights. They're standard on the top trim.
The windscreen wipers now have integrated washers, which is said to save water. And the windscreen itself is more heavily raked, with a bonnet line that's actually 25mm lower than the previous generation. It's a similar look at the rear as well, where the highest point of the roofline has been moved further forwards from before, giving a bit more of a sloping roofline down to the boot.
Now there's no electric tailgate available at all on the Civic, but Honda says that the tailgate itself is around 20% lighter than it was before, so it really isn't too taxing having to lift it up and down yourself. Now with the boot, if there is some bad news among these changes with the new car, perhaps it's here because it is slightly smaller than in the old Civic. But that's not so bad because in that old car, it was one of the biggest boots in the family car class. So yes, it is a bit smaller here. You do have a slight slope towards the back of the boot to help fit in all the batteries underneath it, but this should still be one of the more practical choices in the class. Now the new Civic isn't wildly different inside, but there are enough changes to make it feel like a step forwards for the car compared to the old one. So let's start with the tech, where every new Civic gets a 7-inch digital driver display as standard, but if you go for range-topping advanced trim, which is the model that we're in, then you get this bigger 10.2-inch screen. Now, it's easy to see everything. It's got a very simple layout, but just like it is in the Jazz and the HR-V, the graphics aren't the most crisp by digital driver display standards. But the infotainment system here is a massive step forwards for the car. Now, it's a 9-inch screen. Every version of the Civic gets this as standard, and it's the same system that you get in the Jazz. Now, we've used it a lot, and we know that certainly compared to the frankly terrible system that you had in the previous Civic, this is significantly better. You get Apple CarPlay, you get Android Auto, it's got a simple layout, it's got some physical shortcut buttons on the side of the screen as well. You can also get wireless phone charging down here if you go for range-topping advance, where you can also get a 12-speaker Bose sound system, whereas the lower trim levels get an 8-speaker setup as standard. Also on that range-topping model, you get this piano black finish. But aside from those changes, the layout of this interior and indeed the look is pretty much what you can expect on the lower spec models of this car, which is good because it means you get things like this nice, pretty high quality looking honeycomb effect up on the dashboard here. And all the switchgear feels really high quality as well. Not all the materials are absolutely amazing, so the gear selector plastics used here feel like they've just been ripped out of the CR-V, not the highest quality, but throughout the interior it does feel pretty robust and pretty good quality by the standards of the class. In fact, it feels a bit more consistent and impressive in here than it does in the VW Golf, which goes to show how far the Civic has come over the years, and also to another extent how much the Golf has slipped slightly as well. But overall, this is an impressive interior. And one final change to point out is the positioning of the door mirrors, because Honda says that now they're mounted to the door panel itself, whereas before it was in front of them. So what that does is just free up a bit of extra room to the side of it to improve visibility towards the front a little bit more than it was before. In the back of the new Civic, you've apparently got more glass, and this line is lower than it was before to try and make it feel a bit airier. And also, the distance between the front and rear wheels is 35mm longer than it was before. So legroom is really quite good. But perhaps the standout negative of the Civic from what we've seen today is rear headroom. So if you are 6 foot and if you're sat in the back, your head will be touching the roof lining, and it does feel a bit cramped back here in that respect. We are in a model with the sunroof fitted. That comes as standard on the range-topping version, but the lower two trims don't get it. And with it fitted, it does feel rather cramped back here. And that's particularly disappointing given that the Civic is in the family car class, where lots of its rivals are really quite impressive when it comes to rear seat space.
If you're buying this car and you know you'll only have kids in the back, then that might not be such a problem. And we still need to see what headroom's like on a version that doesn't come with a sunroof. By the way, underneath those rear seats, you'll find some batteries.
The reason there are batteries under those rear seats is because the new Civic is hybrid only. So it gets a 2-litre petrol engine paired with those batteries and 2 electric motors. Now the Jazz and the HR-V in Honda's lineup are also hybrids, but they have 1.5-litre petrol engines. So the setup that you see here is actually similar to the CR-V, but it's all been heavily reworked to go in the new Civic.
Changes include a big increase in torque, and having a hybrid engine gives the Civic a really good chance to stand out in what is a very competitive class. It's up against cars like the Ford Focus, the Vauxhall Astra and the Seat Leon, as well as loads of others. But while many of those cars are available as plug-in hybrids, aside from the Toyota Corolla, there's very few full hybrid rivals that the Civic will be up against.
Like the Jazz and the HR-V, the new Civic is fitted with Honda's eCVT gearbox, which they're quite keen to point out isn't technically a gearbox because it doesn't directly drive the wheels. But in effect, as we've seen with the Jazz and the HR-V, it acts in a very similar way to a CVT. And Honda is well aware that a major negative of cars fitted with CVTs is the engine noise that you get when you accelerate very hard. So in order to try and counteract that, apparently they've worked very hard with the new Civic to improve the engine insulation, and they also use some augmented engine sounds that are piped into the interior as well. So when we drive this car, that will be when we can assess whether it's helped the situation or not. Another good addition to the new Civic is the ability to have an individual drive mode. So like with lots of other cars, you can choose between eco, normal and sport, but in individual, it allows you to configure it yourself. So for example, you can take the steering setup from normal, but the sharper accelerator response from sport. Now that's reasonably useful to have with the standard Civic, but really the benefit of this will probably be if you still have this in the Type R, because one of the few criticisms of the old Type R was that it didn't have an individual mode. So now, hopefully, with the new car, that will change. Now, the old Type R was a properly legendary hot hatch, and it was a real shame when it went off sale towards the end of last year. But we're going to be seeing the new Type R quite soon. And that's slightly unusual because normally when a new standard hatchback is revealed, it's quite a long gap before we eventually see the hot hatch version of it. But we're seeing the new Civic today, and in just a few months, we're going to see the Type R. And then very shortly after that, we're going to be driving it. So let's just hope the new one is at least as good as the old one.
But while we will get a hot hatch version of the Civic, there won't be an estate version with this generation. You could previously buy the Civic Tourer, but we won't see that model again.
The new Civic is going to come with 3 different trim levels. There's entry-level Elegance, then Sport, and then range-topping Advance. And Honda reckons that Sport and Advance are going to be the biggest sellers, and there won't be much between them. But given that the car is going to be pretty well equipped as standard, entry-level Elegance could still be worth considering because it will be the cheapest.
We don't know exactly how cheap though. The outgoing Civic started from around £23,000, but given this new one is hybrid only, it's fair to assume a jump in price, perhaps up to £24,500. If it does start there, then that would still be a pretty competitive price considering it comes with a hybrid setup and lots of equipment as standard. So that's everything you need to know about the new 11th generation Civic. Is it the best one yet? Tell us in the comments below. And to find out more about the Civic and all of its rivals and to get a great deal on your next car, go to whatcar.com.